Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes. Hello, I have a very special guest on my show today, Lee Witting. I have been listening to Lee's radio show for a long time. It seems like my whole life, but that's not true. And he just brings forth such great people to talk about their near-death experiences and a lot of other things. And I've gotten to know Lee a little bit, and he's just, oh my gosh, he just exudes knowledge and love and compassion. And I'm just so excited to have you here today, Lee. And I'll tell you a little bit about him. Lee Witting is host of the podcast NDE Radio, which he founded 6 years ago. He recently retired after 15 years as chaplain at Eastern Maine Medical Center and continues to pastor a congregation at the Union Street Brick Church in Bangor, Maine. Before starting NDE Radio for the International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, he served as their Publicatons Director. And you're still very involved in IANDS, aren't you? That's why you do the show, right?
I do the show. I was on the board to start with, and suggested that we put the show together because I thought it would be a good medium.
Yeah, it's a great.
Yeah, so I yes, I'm definitely involved.
Right. It's a great organization.
In fact, I was going to speak at this conference in Salt Lake City
Yes.
until it got canceled on account of the
virus. I was going to be there. I thought I saw you on the speaker list. So Lee, let's start at the beginning. I know that you had a near-death experience as a child, and can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I might start even earlier. Remember, I told you that being born under a sign story?
Yes, I love that.
All right. Well, my mother always delighted in telling this story, so it's sort of infused in my mind. But she said, you were born under a sign. I said, what do you mean? Because it sounds so ominous. She said, well, I was born in a Salvation Army hospital in during the Second World War, because my father was away at the war. And above the delivery table was this sign painted on the ceiling that said, Jesus saved. So
love it.
I could literally say I was born under a sign. and then when my mother and I went back to our little apartment in Yonkers, New York, she told me much later that she'd had a visit from her grandmother who had passed. The spirit just floating above the ceiling in her kitchen, little kitchen. And she took it as a blessing that I had survived, and that she was watching over two of it. Something else I thought about, in thinking about this show in my early years was I had a wooden rocking horse. It was painted in really bright colors, glossy paint. Probably would have been totally illegal today. It's probably full of lead paint. But my mother said I used to sit in front of that with a paintbrush and a glass of water or jar of water, and I would paint the horse with water over and over and over and over. She said I could spend doing that, spend time by the hour doing that sort of thing. And I thought about it later, and I thought, where we come from before we're even conceived, is a place of much more luminous, intense color, at least according to the near-death experience, which sees this, this beautiful field with luminous flowers and glorious trees and leaves that shine. And I thought I was trying to recapture a brighter color, a memory of a brighter color by doing that over and over and over again.
Very
I can't think of any other
interesting.
reason why.
And you hear a lot also that from near-death experiencers that they see colors that they've never even known were, yes, and just how vibrant. And someone said the other day, it's like it sparkles everywhere. That may have been you.
Yeah, yeah. It's intense, and I think it's more than a visual. It's more of a total perception
Right.
rather than just a visual one. But it's when these things come back to the brain after you've experienced it out of the body, it is that you're at such you have such a desire to tell people about it,
Yes.
at least you should, and to communicate what you've experienced, and it's so hard to find the word.
I remember
So,
PMH saying, you just want to shout to the world.
yes,
But it's ineffable what you can't even
uh,
explain.
yeah.
Yeah.
Although PMH has done a wonderful job of
She has,
explaining
that she
and
that she has.
extracting these explanations from her from kids, especially. She's very
Right.
good.
So tell us a little bit about what happened when I think you were 2 or 3 years old?
Oh no, I was older than that actually, and what happened was my father came back from the war, and he was a little shell shocked. I think, although he would never have admitted it. Um, he was first in the Merchant Marine, and they were convoying materials over to England before we actually were involved in World War II. And the ship just ahead of him was blown up. It was torpedoed
Oh my
and
gosh.
exploded. And he was the medical. He was the chief petty officer who also had medical duties on the ship. He was the only one. There was nobody trained as a doctor. And but they couldn't stop. All these American sailors from the ship ahead or in the water, but they couldn't stop because they would then get torpedoed, and then the next ship would get torpedoed. So the orders were always just sail on through, and I think that just must have done him
Oh yeah.
some PTSD type
Yes.
damage. Anyway, when he came back, he found a little island in northern New Jersey, almost into New York State, and it was on a little lake, and he built a little cottage. In fact, it was one of those back in those days, Sears would sell cottage kits, and he put this thing together, and this was our escape. And it was so close to the shore that there was even a little bridge
Uh,
that we could walk across to get to it. It's still there. My sister's family owns it now. But anyway, I was about 7 years old, and my father had gone into town. My mother was in changing. I think she was getting ready to go to church, and I was still wading out in the water. And I shouldn't have. At 7, you really should know how to swim, but I didn't know how to swim, and I waded out too far, and the shore went out on a fairly level way, and then it dropped. And I knew that, but I just being 7 years old, I went too far. Went down, went way down, came up, screamed because I was terrified for my mother, and then all the air was out of my lungs, so I just sank down. Well, my mother fortunately heard me, and she came running out of the cottage, down the steps, and I realized suddenly I'm watching her do this because although my body's down in the bottom of the lake, I'm up in a birch tree watching as my mother ran down the steps and ran down to the shore and dove in. She knew about where I was and found me, dragged me out, threw me threw my body face down over like a log because she said I wanted to pump. Later told me I wanted to pump the water out of your lungs. But by doing that, she sort of invented CPR because she was doing compressions on my back that were actually making the log do compressions on my heart.
interesting.
And
Yes.
so, meantime, I'm up there. And one of the interesting things about it was, you think 7-year-old would be terrified by something like this, but I think children are so equipped to remember an inkling of where we came from,
Yes.
that it seemed completely natural to me. I thought, okay. And I think you're almost thinking like your adult soul rather than like a 7-year-old brain would think. And I saw there was a place I could go, sort of a light off in the distance, and there weren't any other beings around. But then I also saw how upset my mother was, and I decided I better get back to my body.
Right.
And then I was body.
Wow.
But for years after that, Marla, it was really interesting. I had this dream, a recurring dream, that I was sinking down way from the light, which I took to be the surface of the water, and that it was getting darker and darker as I sunk down, and that it was dark all around me. So when I was 21, I think, in my 20s, I went back to the cottage. I had been sort of haunted by this dream,
Right.
and I decided to go dive in and see if that's what it was really like. So I picked a sunny day like the day this had happened to me, and dove down. It wasn't like that at all. It was the sunlight covered the whole surface of the lake. It wasn't a pinpoint of light. There was plenty of light in the water around me. It wasn't like this dark tunnel. And it was only later, after reading about near-death experiences, that I thought, I'll bet I journeyed into the direction of the light for a moment. And then when I decided to go into my body, I was going away from the light.
Right.
That's what the dream was all about.
In-
That was what.
Interesting. That must have released a lot of, those negative memories, from sort of your shoulders.
Well, it was a fearful dream,
Yeah.
as to sinking in the lake. And after I realized what it was about, it was like it went away. I
Right.
never had. Yeah.
I love when you say that, you said it so beautifully, that when you were up there in that birch tree, it was just the way it was supposed to be. It was just so natural, because I think of it as you're just back closer to your home, to your true home, and it was just so
Or a
natural.
real home.
Yeah, yeah, wow. So how did this experience change you? I know you got into astrology, and I don't know if that was because of your NDE, but can you
Uh,
tell us a little bit about that?
Astronomy.
I'm sorry, astronomy.
Astrology. Later on I got interested in
Yeah,
astrology, but never got very good at it. It
yeah,
was just too complex. Astronomy. Yeah, one of the things that I developed a real interest in almost immediately after this was an interest in finding out more about the stars, going out at night, looking at big spaces, with and I got after my mother. Two things I wanted from her. One, I wanted to go to the Hayden Planetarium as often as I could, because this a wonderful planetarium in New York. In fact, I went back 2 years ago, and it's all changed now. They used to have this huge projector that looked like an enormous ant, and it had all of these lenses. It was built by Zeiss. It was a big German instrument, and sat in the middle of the room and projected the stars and if you wanted a meteor shower or comets or the moon
wow.
or any of that. It was an amazing piece of equipment. Well, now it's all digital. They don't need any of that
Oh.
anymore. But so I didn't get to see I think it was a Zeiss Opticon was, well, I can't remember. No, maybe that wasn't it. Anyway, um, so and I loved those shows. And we'd usually go on the holidays. We'd either go around my birthday in November, or we'd go at Christmas. So it would be the Christmas story would be mixed into the whole thing, and the
Oh,
magic, and
wow.
all of that. So that was a bit of spiritual infusion along with all of this. But I finally decided, and I know what I remember now. What triggered it was this: they were making a little projector that was like, not like the big Zeiss projector, but it had a light bulb in it, and you turned it on, and you could project the stars on your ceiling. And I decided I was going to build a planetarium.
In your
So
attic,
I took
right?
over in the attic. So I took over a room in the attic. I went all over we lived in Cranford, New Jersey, all over the town, trying to find big pieces of cardboard, stores that sold refrigerators and that sort of thing. And I would haul them back home, and I built a whole skyline around the room with the cutout of buildings, just like they had at the Hayden Planetarium. They had the New York skyline. They were assuming you were standing in the middle of Central Park. But anyway, I did my own skyline. I don't think it was based on any actual location. And I had lights behind it that I could dim, so I could do sunsets and sunrises. And then I would write a story, and I would have this projector. In fact, I still have it up there. I don't know if it still works. I haven't turned it on in years. And I would have like bright flashing light if there was going to be an explosion or a meteor strike or something like that. And I'd write these scripts out, to do a story and to do a show. And my mother, who was very patient with me, would come up. We had a mattress on the floor, and she would lie on the mattress and look at the ceiling in the dark. And I would do this whole show. And it was about different things every time. I wouldn't make her sit through the same show twice.
Thank goodness.
She was my only audience. I think maybe I got a couple friends up there once or twice, but they didn't have the patience.
Right. Well, I know you talked. Go ahead.
The other thing I went after my mother about was getting me a telescope so that I could go out and look at the moon, look at the craters on the moon, look at Mars, look at Jupiter and the moons around Jupiter. And so I'd be out there, even in the dead of winter, looking at stuff and thinking, I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking it was really wonderful.
Yeah.
But I didn't really identify it or tie it in with my near-death experience at all. But I think probably it came as a result.
Yeah.
Now, for my mother, one of the things that committed her, I think, to the Catholic Church was the fact that she was so happy that my life had. And so, on that account, she and my sister Anne and my other sister Nancy had to go to a Catholic Sunday school. Well, this was so different from anything I had experienced. There were these tough nuns who, if you didn't memorize your catechism lesson for the day, they would whack you on the back of your hand with a wooden ruler. And so, they're just instilling guilt like only the Catholics can do. And so that, and that too was one of the things that tied me to, I had mentioned before we started this, I'd mentioned the Seventh Seal, the Ingmar Bergman's Seventh Seal. And since we're in my childhood, maybe we can talk about Innocence now.
Absolutely.
Because I had asked Marla about why is the show named the way
Interviews with Innocence.
Interviews with Innocence, because I certainly don't feel that I'm innocent. And probably none of your guests do for that. You ask them, are you innocent? Are you innocent enough to be on my show? I think they would probably say, no way.
Right.
But anyway, trying to think about adult innocence, I remembered how profoundly affected I was by the Seventh Seal. This Bergman movie was made in 1958. I was 16, I guess. Anyway, the story is this night Antonius Block is returning from the Crusades, where he's probably killed many people and maybe participated in burning down this or storming that, or he comes back, he's full of guilt and despair, and I think in a way. And the countryside is full of the plague, which our COVID-19 is trying to reenact right now. He knows he's going to die. He's encountered death, but he challenges death to a game of chess, which they play on the beach. and there's these wonderful scenes. It's a black and white movie, and which is appropriate for playing chess with death, I think. And Antonius makes the mistake of going to confession, which is how I tied it to becoming a Catholic. And he tells the priest what his next move is going to be, how he thinks he can beat death. Well, it turns out the priest is death, sitting in the confessional. So he doesn't see him, of course, because they have a screen in confessionals. So he gives away the game plan in confession, which in a lot of ways turned me against the Catholic Church. Also got me interested in playing chess. And but also in this movie is this young couple, an entertainer. He's a young guy. He's a juggler. He tells jokes and dances and performs for people. He's easily a victim. I mean, he goes into places like bars trying to, ask for change, and they probably ridicule him all the time. But he's got this young wife and this little baby. They travel in this wagon together. They love each other dearly. He's the fool in the classic sense of the tarot card fool, and he's innocent.
Yes.
He has innocence. He hasn't been spoiled by. I mean, he's horrified by the scenes of the Black Death, the plague.
Yes. Well, it was really interesting. I think you're the second person who had asked me that, and I never once thought that a person would think interviews with innocence saying that the people I'm interviewing are innocent. It didn't even cross my mind. And as I told Lee, it was downloaded to me from the light, the source, whatever you may call it. And for me, it's more of that when a young child is born right in the very beginning, which we all have that still inside of us somewhere. And we're so pure, and we haven't learned that we only hang out with certain people, or we haven't learned about fear. We haven't learned about all of those things that complicate life. And so bringing us back, celebrating the very young, but also bringing us back to that innocence by telling stories and near-death experiences and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's a really interesting story, though, about that for you. So anyway, well, let's move on. So I know your journey continued as you went to Columbia, deep interest in Buddhism, and I find it really intriguing that at such a young age, while you were in college, you took a job as a caseworker in Harlem, and that just intrigues me. So did you throughout your life always have this desire to help, kind of I hate to say it, they probably weren't all underprivileged. Harlem carries its own meaning with it. I think it's a much nicer place now. But can you just briefly tell us about that? Because I want to really dive into the work you did after that.
We had moved from New Jersey to Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh. I had been growing up in a very middle class, primarily white society. My father, I'll take it back a little further. When I graduated from high school, my father said, "Well, you're going to go to Columbia." He'd lived in New York. He knew all about New York. He gave me $50, put me on a bus from Pittsburgh to New York. I graduated, I guess I was 16, the year I was going to turn 7. And said, well, New York's going to be a huge distraction if you wait till September when you start school. He said, so go to New York and figure it out. Get yourself a job, find a place to live, and let me know if you need anything. But I had $50 to work with and a bus. Yeah. And I'd lived a fairly sheltered life. So I go to New York, I go to an employment agency. They said, yeah, we can give you a job. It's pushing racks in the garment district. It's going to make $37.50 a week. And I had to pay for a place to live. Well, the closest thing I could find to where I was working in the garment district was the Chelsea Hotel, the famous Chelsea Hotel, where all the down and out broke artists were living, and the beatniks were turning it over to the hippies, and all of that was going on, because this was in the 60s. It was 1960 exactly. And so it was very interesting. The only problem was I couldn't afford the Chelsea Hotel, even as cheap as it was back then. So I moved into the YMCA, which was across the street, the McBurney Y. Anyway, um, so I worked through the summer and met some very interesting but very poor people. I mean, it was a sweatshop company I was basically working for, and it was such a revelation to me. You know, this was a whole different world than I'd seen before. And to answer your original question, no, I don't think I was ever thought I was in this world to help other people. And I wasn't born with that impulse at all. But I went through uh, Eastern Studies at Columbia, along with economics, which my father required that I major in, and English, which I love because I love to write. And so I had a double major in English and economics, but I was close to a third major in Eastern Studies, primarily Buddhism. They had an amazing department at Columbia, probably still do, but they were one of the leading schools in the West, you know, in America for studying this sort of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Eastern religion. And I'd come out of those classes, and my mind would be blown. I'd be standing on a street corner wondering whether I should try to cross in traffic, because I was so totally caught up in this and these ideas. These ideas are so amazingly profound. Anyway, when I graduated from Columbia, did it in 3.5 years, by the way,
Wow.
and because I was out of money at that point. I was married, and my son Matthew had been born, and I, this job came up to be a caseworker, and I didn't know where I was going to be assigned, but I went through the training. This was before there was Medicare or Medicaid, and so my caseload was mainly old people, and they assigned me to Harlem, so they were all black people. Well, they were the most loving. Uh, it's so hard to describe how, with nothing for that and nothing material, they were so rich spiritually and
Yeah.
so kind to me when I was there to help them. And I mean, they were just, I mean, I think in a way they were shocked that there was a white person sitting next to them who cared about what they were going through.
Right.
So that's what triggered it. But I was just blown away by it. I had no idea. You know, I had all of these caricatures of what, you know, Harlem would be like, and black
Yeah.
people like, and poverty was like, and I was all wrong. I was an idiot.
Right. What,
Talk about innocent.
but what,
I was an innocent idiot.
but what a beautiful lesson. What a gift.
Oh, it was incredible. It was the
Yeah.
best thing that could have happened to me. When I was free, I drove over to a little town called Castine on the coast, and there was a decrepit farmhouse, hadn't been lived in years and years and years, had no running water, had no um, septic tank, had an outhouse and a barn that was falling down. And it was $15,000 for the house and 22 acres. And I went in to see the broker, a great old lady that I got to know very well later on, named B. Sperling. And she said, and this is totally against the ethics of a real estate broker, she said, it's been on the market for a while. Offer him 9,500.
I love it. Don't you love
I said,
people like that?
oh, okay. So I offered them 9,500, and they took it. And then I had to scramble to get the down payment
Yeah.
to make it happen when I got home, because that was even 9,500 was a lot of money for me at that point. But anyway, in the long run, we moved there. We worked on restoring the house. My daughter Kristen had been born by then. We were raising chickens and goats, the kids would go down to this little barn that I built, and where the goats were kept. They had a horse. They had a quarter horse, Rusty, and where they could ride. And we planted trees, and like apple trees and peach trees and the like. And we started a farm, cleared a huge field where I had an amazing insight about God and fire and how we're just little sparks coming off the main fire. It was very trippy, insightful thought at the time that has stayed with me. And the nature of souls departing the source, why we do it, where we burn out, do we wind up back in the fire? Anyway.
And this was just a vision that you had?
No, this was an actual huge blaze.
Mhm.
We cleared a field of alder trees of the
Right.
stuff that had grown up over the years. And we started this fire, and as night descended and I was standing there watching it, it was just such a revelation
Yes, yes.
of source, the heat, the light, the beauty, the power, and how we, on a whim perhaps, or ego, or whatever drives us to break free from that and go flying off on our own, and the sparks would go off like this, and very glorious, and then they would just drop
Yeah.
and burn out. And so I took it as a spiritual journey as well.
Yes.
The other thing about the farmhouse was that we had a ghost. And I found out who the ghost was because an old man who lived down the road said when he was a little boy, he had met Al Webster, who was the guy who built this house. He'd come back from the Civil War, had a bad wound in his throat from a shot from the enemy. Anyway, we would hear him walking around upstairs at night. We'd hear the dog would bark. The fur would rise on the back of his neck, and
Interesting.
he'd bark, all excited. Well, we had a friend from Philadelphia, Danny Heifetz, who was a violinist, distantly related to Yasha. And he'd studied in Philadelphia, and he came to visit us, and he wanted to practice every day. So he would go upstairs, and he would be practicing. And one day he came downstairs, he'd been playing a Bach home, and he said, I was playing, he said, and I looked up, and there was this face of an old man just hanging in the air, watching me. And he said, I thought, I wonder what I should do. But he, like a good performer, went
Kept
on
on
playing
playing.
until he finished. And when he finished, the face faded away. And after that, we never had any more footsteps.
How
I think Danny's
interesting.
music had liberated
Yes, somehow that music and
Webster.
very interesting. Wow. So then is that when you started school then when you were living at the old or seminary?
Well, I wound up back I was doing some other things too that I probably didn't even include it in my bio. We were doing summer stock theater.
Oh, okay.
I went back to the University of Maine. I took, they had a graduate course called Master of Arts and Liberal Studies where you could pick your own courses. So I took philosophy and theater
Oh,
together.
what a great
It was
combination.
wonderful. And you could take any course in any department as long as you could justify it to your committee. And so I took all the best courses at the University of Maine
Yeah.
and that were at all related. And that was really helpful later on because we wound up buying this church, the Union Street Church building that had been abandoned in Bangor, Maine. But I'm getting ahead of myself because after we graduated, now this is actually my second wife, Charlene, and I were both students at seminary together.
Okay.
And we'd been together before that. We did theater together. In fact, we met each other doing Oklahoma.
Nice.
But so we went to seminary. She was very good at Greek and Hebrew. I was terrible. I didn't even try to take it. She was the star student in those courses, and she and I driving up to the seminary every day. I would drive past this church, huge church, beautiful old brick church called the Union Street Brick Church, appropriately. And one day I said, I got to go look at it. And I went in, I called the broker. Broker said, I'm so glad you called. They want to turn it into a Section 8 housing, knock down the steeple and take out
Oh,
the glass and all of that. So maybe you can save it. So um, I went to all these meetings. The historic commission had to give its approval because it was an historic building. And it was a Unitarian church. The Unitarians were saying, well, if we can't sell it to these people, it's just going to sit there forever because who's going to buy a church? And I'd be in the back of the room and I'd raise my hand and say,
nice.
I'll buy it. So eventually somebody in the committee said, well, he said he'll buy it. Of course, I had no money compared to this group that wanted to convert it into housing. But how much money the Unitarians could get for it was not the issue. The issue was keeping it
Yes.
church. And so they financed it for me, and we wound up buying it and using it as both a theater and a church. And there's somewhere out in the ether, there's a story that the Christian Science Monitor wrote up about us on
Beautiful.
on all this church is a stage, it was called. And it was we started with Passion Plate, the story of Jesus.
Yes. So back to the NDEs. I know you said one thing about, you mentioned Peter Panagore, who I'm going to actually be interviewing here, I think next week. And you said that one thing that when he says about, it's not that he has faith anymore, he knows. Can you just talk about that when people experience that?
When you've been there, done that, you know it. You don't have to have faith, and it's not to demean or belittle faith. It's just to say, hey, I tell you something, pretty much praising God.
Yes.
For the favor that had happened. It's people come back with gifts too. People come back with a talent for everything from communicating with animals and plants to healing. Some people can do amazing healing after they've had a near death.
Right.
Some of them come back with the ability to prophesy. I've talked to some of them on my show as well. One of the joys of being a chaplain was the chance to talk to people who had coded, whose hearts had stopped, who'd been resuscitated. I'd go in and say, well, did you see anything when you were on the other side?
Yeah.
And their eyes would light up, sometimes. And they'd say, yes, and they wanted to talk about it, but they were afraid people would think they were crazy.
Right.
And then I would take that story to the next room and I'd say, I'd get their permission to do this. I say, of course, I won't use your name or anything, but can I use the story that you just told me? And it was, I think, one that you liked about the woman who had seen her father.
Yes.
She was one that I remember clearly because she was so excited to tell me about it. She said, I saw my father. He died 3 years ago, but he was standing right there. And I was just like I was a little girl again, she said. And I saw behind him, I saw this beautiful light. I just wanted to run into the light, but he said, no, it's not your time yet. So like a little girl, I tried to run around. And this is a woman in her late 50s, probably, maybe early 60s. But she saw herself as just a little child. Wanted to rush into the light. He stops her, says, no, you have to go back. So she came back.
Yeah.
But she was so happy to tell that story. And I said, can I tell this story to other people? She said, oh, yes.
Yeah. They're such beautiful. And I think what's the stories are profound in themselves, but then how it changes people's lives,
Well, one thing that happens almost always is that people are no longer at all afraid of death. Some of them actually yearn for it. There are all kinds of amazing stories, but as I say, the shortcut is to go listen to NDERadio.org.
Right. And I know you talk about reincarnation, which is which is interesting because I think it's especially being a chaplain and going to, I guess growing up, this is my religious background. I was raised Christian, but now I'm spiritual, I guess you could say. Um, I always thought that people didn't really believe in reincarnation if they were like pastors or ministers or chaplains or anything like that. And I love it when you say, which I so believe, that it just wouldn't be fair to have only one life themselves, but then how it changes people's lives,
Well,
Ha-
one thing that happens almost always is that people are no longer at, at all afraid of death. Some of them actually yearn for it.
Yes,
They're not,
yearn to go back.
yeah, to go back. They're not. They know they're not. They can't do it themselves. They have
Right.
to wait. There are all kinds of amazing stories, but as I say, the shortcut is to go listen to nderadio.org.
Right. And I know you talk about reincarnation, which is interesting because I think it's especially being a chaplain and going to, I guess growing up, this is my religious background. I was raised Christian, but now I'm spiritual, I guess you could say. Um, I always thought that people didn't really believe in reincarnation if they were like pastors or ministers or chaplains or anything like that. And I love it when you say, which I so believe, that it just wouldn't be fair to have only one life. And do you know Christopher Bache? I think it's Bache. He talks about that in his book Life Cycles. Anyway, so could you just talk a little bit about that? Because I know you've heard wonderful stories about children recalling past lives. I interviewed Carol Bowman, and she was just beautiful, beautiful stories. So can you we don't have too much more time, but just talk about reincarnation a little bit.
Sure. It goes back to Plato. Plato has this wonderful story
Yes.
in the Republic about how a soldier who's killed in the battlefield wakes up. They're about to burn his body like 2 weeks later after he died, and he wakes up and he tells the story about how um, it's an NDE story, and it's 400 BC. How he wakes up from the funeral pyre, said, "I'm sent back to tell you what happens." Talks about um, a version of a life judgment. His involved judges and maybe a temporary time in hell or in heaven to benefit or to punish. Then he said, we all got together again out in this field, this beautiful field. And then they went, drank from the river of forgetfulness and were reincarnated.
Yes.
And um, there were many Christians early on who believed in reincarnation. It was
Wasn't that
part
the
of
Gnostic text?
well, yes, in Gnostic texts, but I mean, it was part of um, some of the church fathers up
Right.
until the 300s. They started trying to codify the church, and I think they probably did away with reincarnation because it allows for too much flexibility on the part of the parishioners. They can't control your congregation if they think, "Hey, this is tough, but I'm going to be reborn and I'll do it again
Right.
somewhere
Yes.
else under some other circumstances." They didn't like allowing that much flexibility. But
Ah,
how can you say if well, like the fundamental Christians say, you've got to even before they were conceived and said, "I'm going
yeah.
to be your son," or "I'm your daughter," and there are a lot of stories
Yeah,
out
I
there like
have
that as
someone
well.
coming on who's a spirit baby medium, and she connects with spirit before even pregnancy, and I'm very excited about that. So, well, Lee, we need to wrap it up, but thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your life story, and I really, really, yes, absolutely. And once again, if people want to find you, since this is the second part of your
Right.
interview.
Uh, IANDS NDE Radio at the Google Store or Apple will get you a free app that you can put on your phone. You put all
Yes.
the past shows, or you can just go to nderadio.org and all the shows come up. Hit the past shows button. There are 350 some odd shows, and if
Wow.
you're at all interested in in what people have to say about what they saw on the other side. I mean, if you go through the whole archive, you will be a believer by the end of it. I am sure.
Yes,
These stories
absolutely.
are so convincing.
Absolutely.
And it's been a joy for me to participate in people's stories.
I bet. Well, thank you very much, and you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.